Ask yourself only, what are the facts and what is the truth that the facts bear out?
Deconverted man here with a video response to Rev Bro Daniel Phillip from New York, USA. Rev Bro Daniel Phillip presents a number of logical fallacies in his video. I'm going to play clips from the video and then tell you what logical fallacy he has performed as the logical fallacy counter continues to rise.
An atheist might object to the idea that atheism is evil. After all, atheism does not prescribe a moral code. Yet that is exactly the problem.
This is nothing more than a straw man. Rev Bro Daniel here creates an argument against something that is not a position that atheism takes. Now, he says the whole problem is that atheism doesn't prescribe a moral code. Yeah? So what? That's like saying Republicans don't prescribe a moral code. Why would you think being a Republican would prescribe a moral code? Essentially, he makes atheism into a worldview when it's not. Thus, this is a straw man.
Since atheism has no moral code, those who embrace it can be as evil as they wish.
Poisoning of the well. Poisoning of the well is essentially when you try to create an argument that will undermine any potential arguments that your opponent makes by making your opponent evil, wrong, stupid, immoral, etc. by default. Anyone that's opposed to me is stupid. So if you're opposed to my arguments, then you're stupid. And because you're stupid, you don't have any argument, therefore my argument automatically wins. That is poisoning of the well, and that's exactly what he's doing here.
Without any contradiction to their worldview.
Atheism is not a worldview. Straw man, once again.
Saying a person ought to behave in a certain way implies that someone designed us in the world.
The non sequitur, or does not follow. What happens here is the person presents a premise, which is a true premise, and then presents a conclusion which just doesn't follow from that premise. How does it follow that just because we assign rules or moral codes, that this then means that we're created by anything beyond our parents? It doesn't. It's simply a conclusion that's not warranted given the premises. Thus, it's a non sequitur and just doesn't follow.
God is the only source for objective morality.
Tautology is where a statement must be true by its very construction. It's an argument essentially that's using circular reasoning. He's saying it's true because it's true. And he's giving us no reason to think that it's true other than it must be true.
If there is no God, then there is no morality.
An appeal to consequence. Even if this is true, and it might be true, that does not necessarily mean, therefore, that we must reject the conclusion. If it's not true, then this! Yeah? So what? What's your point? And maybe that is the way it is. The truth doesn't care whether we like it or not, believe it or not, or accept it or not. The truth is the truth regardless of our feelings about it. This is clearly nothing more than an appeal to consequence.
Since the atheist rejects the very source of goodness, he rejects goodness itself.
This is another straw man. In order to reject something, one must believe that that something is a thing. Simply because I don't believe in leprechauns doesn't mean that I reject leprechauns.
And Jesus' reply was, "Why do you call me good? Only God is good."
An appeal to authority. Even if the authority is the greatest authority that one can point to, say here on Earth it might be a president or a king or queen, and say, hey, this person who is of great authority with great power says this thing is true, or said that this particular thing that agrees with me. That doesn't mean that I should conclude that that's true, simply because that person is a person of authority. It might even be God itself, the greatest authority that one could imagine. Okay, even if God says, hey, do this, it's not good enough to just say, because I told you to. An appeal to one's own authority, even if someone has that authority, is not good enough. It's a logical fallacy. Maybe to a little kid saying, because I said so, is good enough, but for a grown adult, absolutely not.
An action cannot be good on its own, and when our actions are done in accordance with God's will, only then are those actions good.
Circular reasoning and special pleading. Not only is he arguing in a circle, but he's also setting aside actions that people do as good actions. He says first, no actions are good unless it's these good actions that are only good under these circumstances because they're God's will. Therefore, they're good. Otherwise, they're bad. And how do we know that they're good or bad? Because they're good if God wills it, and they're bad otherwise. So that's nothing more than circular reasoning and special pleading.
An atheist cannot perform any actions which can be called good.
Special pleading and non sequitur. Before, he said there were no good actions. So any action by default that atheist or anyone does isn't good, except for the special pleading that he had of God's will. But couldn't one imagine a scenario that an atheist accidentally does God's will, or does God's will because God wanted them to? And wouldn't an atheist converting into a theist be God's will? But he's saying here that they can't do any of those things, or he's just saying that they can't do good things, which he already established.
There is simply no such thing as an atheist who is a good person.
Ad hominem, an attack against the person rather than the arguments. It might be the case that you might find a handful of atheists who are bad people. You may even find a large group of atheists who might be bad people. But that doesn't negate any argumentations that those people make. Similarly, simply because Christians in the past performed the Christian Crusades, or Catholics in the present have hid pedophiles, or certain Muslims have become terrorists, doesn't negate any of the truth claims made by that group or those people. It means nothing. All it means is that sometimes people are good, and sometimes people are bad. The truth of whatever the argument is needs to be examined for itself. Set aside whatever you think that person might be. A prisoner might have a very compelling argument that might be completely logically valid. Simply because they're a prisoner doesn't mean that we negate their argument. Well, they did something bad and they're a prisoner, so everything they say can't be trusted. Well, we don't know that. They might have an argument that holds sound. They might have ideas that are sound. They might be a bad person, sure, but that doesn't negate the arguments, whatever those arguments are.
Now you can clearly see that atheism is not only the rejection of a god.
I don't believe in goblins, orcs, or dragons. That doesn't mean I reject goblins, orcs, and dragons.
If there is no god, then where does the goodness of an atheist come from?
Meaningless question. This question has no real meaning. From earlier, his established premises were that without a god, there was no such thing as good. So if it was true that there wasn't a god, then whether you were atheist or not, you would have nowhere to get good from, since good would not be a real thing. Therefore, this question is unanswerable if we grant his premise that without a God there is no good. Therefore, the question, because he is granting his own premises, becomes meaningless.
It comes from the society he lives in.
Yet another straw man. Morality doesn't have to come from the society that somebody lives in. You can get it from philosophy. You can get it from family members. You can invent it yourself. Or you could even get it from some religion, even if you're not an adherent to that religion. You might think that the morality or ethics prescribed by that religion are interesting, but maybe not the rest of that religion. Morality and ethics don't have to be derived from society. Thus, the conclusion that this person is drawing is not warranted and is nothing more than a straw man.
It is nothing more than the majority opinion. Morality loses all meaning, because it is then pure subjective preference.
Does not follow. A majority opinion is not subjective preference. It's the preference of the majority. But wouldn't it be possible that a society had a theocracy and compelled people either by coercion or force or, whatever other methods to try to get them to do God's will, which is, according to him, a good thing? In that sort of society, everybody would either be doing that, exiled from that society, murdered, killed, put in prison, whatever, the consequences. And that society, which would be based upon a majority opinion that this is the right thing to do, would happen to be correct by accident. So the idea that it can't be correct just because it's a majority opinion fails, and the idea that it's subjective because it's a majority opinion also fails.
Once a person decides that morality is subjective, they have set up the perfect conditions for evil actions.
Argument from adverse consequences. Essentially saying, well, if everyone or if people believe that morals are subjective, it lets them do evil. It sets them up for the perfect situation for them to do evil. That might be the case. I don't think it is, but it might be the case. That doesn't necessarily mean that subjective morals are not the truth of the matter. They might be true, in which case the consequence may or may not follow. But even if it is the case, to deny the first just because we don't like whatever the consequences might be is a logical fallacy.
Think of a serial killer.
Red herring. A red herring attempts to distract the audience with a similar seeming argument or similar seeming premises, while leading them off the beaten path towards something completely different. We now have to go off to argue this other thing that really doesn't have much, if anything, to do with the original topic.
The Buddha said in Dharmapada 176,
appeal to authority. Again, citing an authority figure who said anything doesn't make your argument automatically win.
Atheism guarantees evil. Atheists only comply with society's moral code as a pretense. It is just their selfish desire to fit in with the majority.
Special knowledge. Saying that I know what you think or I know what your group thinks is special knowledge pleading. If I said to this creator of this video that I'm responding to, I know that deep down you don't believe in God, I would be committing the same fallacy as he's committing now.
They don't actually believe good and evil exist. If the majority began to adopt evil as a social norm, the atheist would be singing the beauty of those morals. Western society has been shaped over the course of centuries by the teachings of Christ.
Outright lie. If your argument is so weak that you need to start lying to make it work, it's time to just give up. Anyone that studies history and doesn't do so looking at fundamentalist Christian websites will find out that what he just said here is a complete and utter lie in regards to the history of America.
And the world would fall into great darkness if ever atheism took hold of it. In fact, this is what they're working towards right now. If they can succeed in eliminating religion, then society will inevitably drift away from Christian love and into the darkness which is atheism.
Recall when Bro Rev said that not believing in an afterlife allows one to do evil because they have no cosmic justice? What about the belief of some Muslims who think that by destroying non-Muslims, and often themselves, that this will catapult them into heaven? What about those who believe that sins are forgiven forever, in all time? In such a case, that person could continue to do bad in life and have no cosmic punishment if they happen to be right. Is ending all religion really what Bro Rev is concerned with, or is it just his religion? Conclusion. Perhaps Rev Bro will fix all the logical fallacies in his video. As it stands, I cannot accept his conclusion, as it's just not warranted logically. If he will not admit to producing logical fallacies, I submit his ideas are not logically sound.